There is something wrong with our clocks, not metaphorically, not as a complaint about the speed of modern life, or a lament about how weekends disappear too fast, or a vague spiritual unease. I mean it structurally, mechanically, demonstrably. Something is wrong, and the deeper I looked, the more I began to suspect that the wrongness wasn't accidental. Here is the most basic version of the problem. We move our clocks forward every spring and back every autumn. We call it daylight saving time. We've done it so long in so many countries that it has the quality of natural law. The sun, the earth, the tides, and then, apparently, the ritual of adjusting our wristwatches twice a year, as if the light itself needed our bureaucratic approval to shift, as if time was something that could be voted on. That sounds like a mundane complaint. Stay with me. Because daylight saving time wasn't ancient. It wasn't inherited from some deep cultural tradition, or encoded in the architecture of civilization. It was invented in 1895 by a New Zealand entomologist named George Vernon Hudson, who wanted more daylight hours to collect insects after work. An insect collector. That is the official origin story of the mechanism that governs the waking hours of over 1 billion people, and it was formally adopted across much of the industrialized world during the First World War, not for the benefit of farmers as the myth goes, but to conserve coal, to serve industry, to keep the machinery running. The deeper I went, the more I found that this wasn't an isolated adjustment. It was the latest in a long series of interventions, a sequence of replacements, each one erasing something older, something more organic, something that had, for centuries, perhaps millennia, kept human beings synchronized with something larger than a factory shift. This raises a simple but critical question. What exactly were we synchronized with before? Here's something that doesn't make it into most history books. Before 1847, every city in England kept its own time. Not approximately, precisely. Bristol's solar noon occurred 10 minutes after London's, because Bristol sits 10 minutes of longitude to the west. So Bristol kept Bristol time. Norwich kept Norwich time. Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham, Edinburgh, each city tracked its own local solar rhythm, the sun's actual position in their actual sky. This wasn't seen as inconvenient. It wasn't seen as provincial or backward. It was simply accurate. It was time as experienced by the body standing on that particular piece of earth. And then the railways came. The Great Western Railway standardized its timetables to London time in 1840. Other lines followed. By 1847, the Railway Clearinghouse, a coordinating body for the competing rail companies, recommended that all British railways adopt Greenwich Mean Time. Not because the sun had moved, not because anything natural had shifted, but because a machine, a network of iron tracks, required uniformity. The sun was subordinated to the locomotive. The official explanation presents this as progress, efficiency, the rational organization of a modern nation. And that explanation is not wrong exactly. But it collapses here. It assumes that the system being replaced was inferior. It assumes that local solar time was a limitation, a parochialism to be overcome. But was it a limitation, or was it information? When your body wakes with the local dawn, the actual dawn, the one visible from your window on your meridian, something happens that doesn't happen when your alarm goes off at 6:47 a.m., regardless of the season and your latitude. Your endocrine system responds to actual light. Your cortisol follows an actual gradient. Your hunger, your energy, your sleep pressure, these systems evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to track the real sun, not a standardized administrative approximation of it. We didn't just change our clocks, we changed our relationship with the light. And the railways were only the beginning. In 1884, 25 nations met in Washington, D.C. for the International Meridian Conference. They divided the Earth into 24 time zones, each one a clean mathematical slice, and declared Greenwich the prime meridian. The entire planet was reorganized around a single point in a London suburb. Think about what that means. In the space of less than 40 years, the entire human relationship with time, a relationship built over millennia, embedded in culture and biology and architecture and ritual, was dismantled and replaced. Not gradually, not reluctantly, swiftly, enthusiastically, comprehensively. The evidence suggests something much larger than railway scheduling was at work here. Stand in the old town square of Prague and look up. There, bolted to the southern wall of the old town hall, is a machine that has been measuring time continuously since 1410. 600 years. The Prague horloge, the astronomical clock. Most tourists photograph it for its moving figures. The 12 apostles parading past a window on the hour, the skeleton ringing a bell, the rooster crowing. It's theatrical. It's medieval. It looks like decoration. It isn't decoration. It tells you not just the hour, but the position of the sun and moon in the zodiac, the current phase of the moon, the time of sunrise and sunset for that specific day, recalculated daily based on Prague's actual position on Earth. It shows Babylonian time, Old Czech time, and Central European time simultaneously, 3 different systems of temporal measurement displayed side by side, as if whoever built it expected you to need all 3. As if they understood that time was not one thing, but many. This was not decorative. This was functional. This was how educated people in medieval Europe understood time, not as a single stream moving uniformly from second to second, but as a layered, cyclical, multi-dimensional phenomenon tied to the movements of celestial bodies and the rhythms of the natural world. And they built an instrument to track it in 1410. Now ask yourself, when did you last see a clock that showed you the position of the moon? The Prague clock is not alone. Not by a long way. The Torre dell'Orologio in Venice, completed in 1499, tracks lunar phases and the movement of the sun through the zodiac as primary information, not decorative afterthought, not background detail, primary, essential. The kind of information a person in 1499 Venice apparently needed to know every day. The astronomical clock in Strasbourg Cathedral, the 3rd version, completed in 1843, just 40 years before Greenwich time was imposed on the world, contains a perpetual calendar, an orrery showing planetary positions, a display of solar and lunar eclipses, and an automaton procession of figures marking the hours. It was completed in 1843. By 1884, the temporal philosophy it embodied would be formally obsolete, replaced, standardized away. Gdansk, Lund, Olomouc, Bern, Wells Cathedral in Somerset, the Zimmer Tower in Lier, Belgium. Dozens of cities across Europe and beyond built these instruments. These were not clocks in the modern sense, not devices for telling you when your meeting starts. They were observatories, calendrical computers, interfaces between human civilization and the cycles of the cosmos. And here's the strangest part. They all had one thing in common beyond their sophistication. They were all designed around the assumption that time is cyclical, lunar, solar, tied to bodies larger than any government, older than any empire, the sun moving through the zodiac, the moon waxing and waning, the planets cycling through their slow ellipses. The modern clock has none of this. The modern clock counts forward from midnight and tells you nothing else. Nothing about where the sun is, nothing about the moon, nothing about the season, the tide, the length of the day. In a period of roughly 50 years in the late 19th century, almost all of it was abandoned. The first great disruption of natural time was railway standardization in the 1880s. The second came in 1916. Germany, in the middle of the First World War, became the first nation to implement daylight saving time. The stated rationale was coal conservation, shift the working day forward by 1 hour in summer, reduce the need for artificial lighting in the evening, save fuel for the war effort. Within weeks, Britain followed, then France, then most of the belligerent nations on both sides. The war ended, daylight saving remained. Not everywhere, not consistently, not without resistance. The history of DST through the 20th century is a catalogue of implementation, abandonment, re-implementation, regional variation, and political arguments so chaotic it would be comical if it weren't so revealing. The United States adopted it during World War I, abandoned it afterward, re-adopted it during World War II, then left it to individual states, creating a period in the 1960s where a bus journey from Ohio to West Virginia might cross 7 time changes in just 35 miles. 7 time changes in 35 miles. Does that sound like a rational system? Does that sound like the product of logical, dispassionate administrative planning? Or does it sound like something else, like a system improvised around priorities that had nothing to do with human well-being and everything to do with industry, scheduling, commerce, and control? The official explanation begins to collapse here, because the coal-saving rationale for daylight saving has been studied extensively, and the evidence suggests it saves almost nothing. Multiple analyses across multiple countries have found negligible energy savings from DST, and some studies suggest it may actually increase energy consumption. The original justification, it turns out, may have been wrong, or may never have been the real justification at all. This raises a simple but critical question. If it doesn't save energy, what does it do? What it does measurably is disrupt sleep. Studies published in peer-reviewed journals have documented spikes in heart attacks, traffic accidents, workplace injuries, and psychiatric episodes in the days immediately following the spring clock change. The human body, calibrated to natural light cycles over hundreds of thousands of years, does not adapt quickly to having its temporal reference point moved by an hour. The disruption is real, the harm is documented, and yet the practice continues, in most of the world, year after year, with the kind of institutional inertia that suggests the disruption may not be an unintended side effect. It may be the point. Let me show you more of what was lost. The Antikythera mechanism. Retrieved from a Roman-era shipwreck off the Greek island of Antikythera, in 1901, this corroded bronze device sat in a museum drawer for decades before anyone understood what they were looking at. When they finally did, in the 1970s and more precisely in the 2000s with advanced imaging technology, the answer was almost impossible to accept. This was a handheld mechanical computer built approximately 150 BC, capable of predicting the positions of the sun and moon, the phases of the lunar cycle, the timing of solar and lunar eclipses, and the 4-year cycle of the Pan-Hellenic Games simultaneously. It tracked the Metonic cycle, a 235-month period after which solar and lunar calendars realign. It knew about the Saros cycle, an 18-year eclipse prediction sequence still used by astronomers today. 2,000 years old. Gears, differential mechanisms, encoded astronomical knowledge sophisticated enough that we couldn't fully decode it until we built computers to help us. The official explanation says it was a one-off, an anomaly, a singular achievement of Hellenistic engineering that left no descendants. But why? Why would a civilization capable of building that device simply stop? Why would no Roman, no Byzantine, no medieval European continue or improve upon it? The mechanism was recovered. It existed. Someone built it, which means someone understood the principles well enough to engineer it. That knowledge doesn't evaporate. It doesn't dissolve into the sea air, unless it was allowed to, or encouraged to. The Jantar Mantar observatories of India. There are 5 of them built between 1724 and 1735 by Maharaja Jai Singh II of Jaipur. Not instruments, buildings, architectural instruments. These were not instruments, they were buildings. Sundials with gnomons 90 feet tall, accurate to 2 seconds. Structures dedicated to measuring celestial altitudes, solstices, equinoxes, in stone, 3 centuries ago. working machines for tracking celestial cycles in real time with a precision that humiliates most modern wall calendars. And here's the strangest part. Jai Singh built them because the astronomical tables he'd inherited were, in his view, insufficiently accurate. He wanted better data, and he built observatories the size of buildings to get it. A king, in the 18th century, dissatisfied with existing precision. What was he tracking that required 90-foot accuracy? Across the ocean, Mesoamerican civilizations built their cities around astronomical observation with an obsessiveness that our official narratives still struggle to explain. The Caracol Tower at Chichen Itza aligned its windows to the path of Venus. El Castillo's stepped pyramid is constructed so that on the spring and autumn equinoxes, a pattern of light and shadow creates the visual appearance of a serpent descending its staircase, a phenomenon that lasts exactly 34 minutes using natural light alone. The Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan is oriented so that on specific dates, the setting sun aligns precisely with its western face. Not approximately. Precisely. As if they were following instructions they didn't fully understand, or as if they understood something we've been taught to dismiss. And then there is the calendar. We cannot close this investigation without it. Because if something was done to the clock, something was also done to the calendar. And the evidence here is, if anything, even more difficult to explain away. The Gregorian calendar, the one on your wall, the one your phone runs on, the one that governs every deadline and appointment of modern civilization, is irregular, chaotic even. Months of 28, 29, 30 and 31 days distributed in a pattern so arbitrary that children need a knuckle mnemonic to remember it. February shrinks in most years and bloats in others. The 4 quarters don't align. The weeks don't divide evenly into months. Months don't divide evenly into the year. It is a system that, on close inspection, appears designed not for human use but for something else entirely. For administration, for control, for the production of a population that is permanently, slightly disoriented, permanently dependent on an external authority to tell them what day it is. That sounds like a strong claim. Look at the alternative. 13 months, 28 days each. 13 times 28 equals 364, exactly 52 weeks, exactly 4 perfect 7-day cycles per month, every year, without exception. Add 1 day outside the monthly count, a day of transition, a day that many ancient traditions specifically designated as sacred, as a threshold, a day between years, and you have 365. A solar year, perfect, symmetrical, repeating. Every month begins on the same day of the week. Every quarter contains the same number of days. The system is, mathematically, elegant in a way that our current calendar simply isn't. And here's what the official explanation doesn't tell you. This wasn't a fringe idea. It wasn't a thought experiment or a reformer's proposal. It was the operating calendar of civilizations that built things we still can't fully explain. The Maya. Not the cartoon Maya of apocalypse films, but the actual historical civilization that produced the most sophisticated astronomical records in the ancient world, tracking planetary cycles across centuries with an accuracy that rivals modern computation. They used 13 months. The ancient Egyptians, not as a mystical preference but as administrative practice, used a calendar of 12 months of 30 days each, with 5 pagomenal days appended outside the regular count, a threshold, a ceremonial gap. The Druids of pre-Roman Britain organized their sacred calendar around 13 lunar months, each of 28 days. The Yoruba of West Africa, the Lakota of the Great Plains, across continents, across millennia, without contact, according to official history. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. The 28-day month isn't arbitrary. It mirrors the lunar cycle, the actual visible cycle of the moon from new to full and back again to within hours. It mirrors the average human menstrual cycle, a biological rhythm that pre-agricultural peoples tracked as intimately as the seasons. The number 13 is the number of full moons in a solar year, not approximately, 13, precisely. The system isn't mystical, it's biological, it's astronomical, it's aligned. The deeper I went, the more I found evidence not just of systems replaced, but of systems remembered by the body itself. Human beings have a circadian rhythm, an internal clock embedded in every cell of the body, regulated by exposure to natural light, calibrated over evolutionary time to the solar day. This is not metaphor, this is physiology. The suprachiasmatic nucleus, a tiny cluster of neurons in the hypothalamus, fires in response to light hitting the retina, synchronizing hormonal cycles, body temperature, digestion, immune function, and sleep to the actual local solar day. Not to Greenwich Mean Time, not to the Central European time zone, not to the standardized schedule that says your workday begins at 9 regardless of whether the sun has risen. The body clock runs on the real sun, the local sun, the sun as it exists above your specific longitude on any given morning. And for most of human history, we lived in sync with it. We woke near dawn, we worked in daylight, we slept when it grew dark, not because we were simple or pre-modern, but because the biology demanded it. The rhythm was the point. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision when you look at pre-industrial sleep records. Historians studying diaries, court records, and medical texts from medieval and early modern Europe have found consistent references to what they call segmented sleep, the practice of sleeping in 2 distinct periods separated by an hour or 2 of wakefulness in the middle of the night. Not insomnia. Normal sleep as it was universally understood before artificial light extended the social day and standardized work schedules compressed the night. We didn't just lose a calendar system, we lost a sleep pattern, a hormonal pattern, a relationship with darkness that our ancestors considered completely natural, and that modern medicine now struggles to explain, as if something fundamental was reconfigured, as if the biological settings were adjusted to match the new schedule, rather than the other way around. I don't know what time it is. Not really. I know what my phone says, I know what the clock on the wall says. I know that I'll be told to move my clocks forward, and that scientists who study the health effects of this adjustment will publish papers I won't read, and that the adjustment will happen anyway, and that I'll adapt, and that after a few days I'll forget there was ever a different hour. But I keep coming back to the Prague clock, to those 7 simultaneous systems, to the astronomer king who built a 90-foot sundial because the existing instruments weren't precise enough, to the 4 surviving books of a civilization that knew things we have, officially, decided not to ask about. What were they tracking? All of them on every continent with such precision and such consistency. What was so important that it required the pyramid of the sun, the Jantar Mantar, the horloge, the Antikythera mechanism? What signal were they listening for that required instruments of such staggering sophistication, instruments that, in some cases, we couldn't fully decode until the invention of modern computing? What I can tell you is that the bodies we inhabit still run on the old system. The circadian clock in your hypothalamus is still calibrated to local solar time. Your hormones still respond to the actual phases of the moon. Your sleep instincts still reach for that quiet waking hour in the middle of the night that segmented sleepers knew for thousands of years. The biological memory of natural time runs deeper than any railway schedule. What I can tell you is that every culture that maintained a relationship with the 13-month lunar count described that relationship as a form of health, bodily, communal, spiritual, a way of staying in rhythm with something larger, a way of not getting lost. And what I can tell you is that in the great accounting houses of the late 19th century, the factory floors, the railway networks, the imperial administrative offices, in all of these places, an irregular, locally grounded, celestially oriented human being was a problem. A problem of scheduling, of efficiency, of control. A person who measured their day by the sun and their month by the moon was a person who was harder to manage, harder to mobilize, harder to synchronize with industrial demand. The synchronized clock solved that problem beautifully. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So I leave you here where every honest investigation eventually arrives, not at an answer, but at a shape. The shape of something taken, not lost, taken, not forgotten through neglect, but overwritten through intention. A system of knowing where you are in time, in the real celestial biological sense of that phrase, replaced by a system of being told what time it is. And somewhere, in the basement of a cathedral in Strasbourg, a clock is still turning, still tracking the moon through its phases, still marking the sun's position in the sky, still doing what it was built to do in a world that was already beginning to forget why any of that mattered. The clock still knows. The question is whether we do.